funny. Your hair is what my hair was.
Exactly. Now I want my long hair back. Good morning, everyone. Well, good morning here on the East Coast. We're here in New York City. Well, I am at least. New York's back. Are you back in New York?
Yep. Down the street.
And welcome to Goaldigger on LinkedIn Live. I'm your host, Cate Luzio, founder and CEO of Luminary. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize this monumental historical moment this week of the swearing in and induction of the first Black South Asian woman vice president. Regardless of your political affiliations, you have to hopefully all think this is a huge moment for not only women, but for the youth that are looking up, particularly girls, but also boys, saying, wow, there's a woman in power. That's the regular. That's the norm. That's the rule. That's no longer can be the exception. So I'm pumped up. I'm excited about the future. And, hopefully this is like a domino effect. And I couldn't be more excited to bring on another woman leader that I have had the opportunity to learn about, to know, to call a friend, certainly a Luminary member and ambassador, but Nancy Rhodes. And I can never do her intro justice, so I'm not even going to try. So Nancy, tell us who you are.
Well, it's actually funny. My intro kind of came from you because I kept what I did. She's like, no, you should say it like this. I'm like, oh. So I always have this thing where I'm like, I'm a shoe designer by day and I still love what I do. But at night or, in my off time, I'm building on-demand clothing alterations and repairs in order to increase body positivity and inclusivity through fit and customization. So it's an opportunity to be the owner of your own wardrobe, which I feel like we never are. And so I had always had trouble like, oh, am I my shoe designer, my founder? And she's like, you could be both. And I was like, oh, look at that. So that's what I do day and night.
I love it. Day and night. 24/7, because we know we never get a break.
Yeah.
So, but before we talk about Alternu, which I'm a heavy user of, and we can talk about that too, we met through another Luminary member, Sharika Tharani. She brought you in to have coffee this is when, this is a physical space. And a lot of the conversation was around your master's degree and sustainability. And at the time, I didn't really know your background, right? And then as you started to come to more events, I really understood what you did in your sort of day job and your career. But what have you been doing the past 15 years prior to getting your master's, first of all, but also launching this business?
Well, that's so funny. I remember that day. And that day I was actually interviewing Sharika for my master's thesis, which I finished during the pandemic, and I'm now a master's graduate. Thank you very much. I actually, I've had a very privileged, lovely, wonderful life. I say that because I have enjoyed it immensely, but I grew up in Los Angeles, California. So anyone out there who's from LA, hello. And then I moved to Oregon in high school. And then all my Oregon friends are like, no, you're an Oregonian. Okay, fine. But then I went to University of Oregon, huge Duck fan. I know you have big alma mater ties too. I bleed yellow and green. I was actually the president of the Alumni Association New York chapter for a while. But I had wanted to be a shoe designer, I wanted to be a designer when I was 3. So my neighbor, she was a fashion designer and she was getting her college degree and she had a fashion show. She invited my mom and I, yes, I was that young, but she babysat me to see her show. And I remember there was this ethereal green cape that just came strolling down the runway. It was velvet. And I was just like, that's what I want to do, Mom. And my mom's like, okay, that's what you'll do. And I went to art classes and I did all these things and 3 to 7 to 10. And I finally got to a point where I had a name for it. My first name was going to have a fashion label called Pink Lemonade. Pink Lemonade was my first. And then when I was 14 or 15, I was like, okay, my label's going to be Narrow, Narho. And in fact, I just had a big birthday. I turned 40. And I had asked friends and colleagues and people I know to send me like notes and memories, just because I knew we can do it in person. And I'm, as my personal Instagram handle is Party Captain Nancy, which is a story for another day. Lots of stories. But yeah, so a friend had written to me and she's like, I remember being friends with your sister and coming to visit you when we were in college, and you were telling me about your clothing label that you were going to have and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, this girl has it together and I don't even know what I'm doing and I'm in college. And so I always laugh at that. But, it's a certain age in high school. It's like, I really have to find a niche. So I'm going to be a shoe designer. And again, my parents were like, okay, do that. And so all through school, I got a business and art degree. I was always a person of balance. I always knew if I wanted to be an art major, I also had to study business. I also had to see, if I was going to be a designer, how would I be successful in that? How would I build something? And so I ended up getting my degree in art and business, and have been a designer. I've worked for everyone from Beyonce. I worked for House of Darion. And yes, I have met her. And yes, I have been to Miss Tina Knowles' house in Houston. And we showed her a line of shoes on her pool table. And it was and it just so happened that something had happened and Beyonce was there. So in walks Beyonce and everyone's like, what was she like? I'm like, I'm pretty sure there was a fan going against her as she walked in. She was not wearing shoes. She was wearing a house dress that probably cost more than my apartment. But I was, obviously I will never forget it as long as I live. And I remember, she left and they left and my sales rep and I were just like, oh my God. But lots of neat things. I'm like, how do you go up from there?
Yeah.
But I've worked for Kenneth Cole, who's a really great philanthropist. And I got to see a lot of what he did there. I've worked for other different companies. I've built shoes for everywhere from Bloomingdale's and Neiman Marcus to Target and Payless, which is, again, another story for another day. But I've done great things. And it was kind of this thing where I kept building. And a couple years ago, I was like, I'm feeling like I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I don't know if this is what's fulfilling me anymore. So through this I always say I followed the breadcrumbs. So I decided to I was actually on a train and I ran into a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in 7 years. And we were talking and I was like, yeah, I'm just not sure what my next steps are. And I was still working, I was still happy. And she's like, well, I've been taking classes and getting my master's at GCNYC. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And she was basically like, it's about sustainability, but it's in the same way we talk about everything. It's how do we create business solutions to sustain for our future? And that's people, planet, and profit, and putting those all into that same category of how do you build profit, but also think of people and planet. And it's not one over the other. It's knowing that you can do them all together in a balanced way. And so I was like, okay. So 2 weeks later, I was signed up and getting my master's. And at that time, it was kind of a lucky situation because the UN, they were in line with their SDG goals. So I was able to get a scholarship, a partial scholarship to go there. So it was like, how do I not take this?
Yeah.
And I remember I was sitting with a friend and we were kind of I met her on the first day of school. And it was that kindergarten moment where you sit next to someone and where you're we're going to be friends forever. And we are. I call her my muse, because not only is she the person, we were hanging out talking sustainability and she works for a company doing innovation and solutions for a fashion company, a really big fashion company. And I was working at a company, building footwear for 7 different brands. And she was like, oh yeah, well, when I was in college, I was actually making money doing alterations for people. And I looked at her and I was like, is that monetized? Is that something you can do? And she's like, oh, there's a couple people. So the next day it was like I got hooked, and I did all this market research. I was looking at, there had been companies who had tried to do it, and through like,
Yeah, there have been, and I haven't done
yeah.
well.
So that was what I was going to say. And like, but knowing, the key to my education was knowing why they hadn't done why I could do better. And so it was just, and I ended up writing my thesis about democratizing customization, how we can create sustainable solution through alterations. So that was kind of this like aha moment. And my master's thesis was kind of my green light to start my business. And I haven't even given you a chance to ask a question. I'm just strolling on through, but I know you're going to ask me about the face mask initiative. So I, on March 13th, we were supposed to have a launch party for Alternu, and I was so excited. We had booked a venue. We had a huge blogger, Twinspirational Parties, who have like 75,000 followers. They were going to host it for us. We had alterationists coming in to do alterations for people while they were having like sips and cocktails and food, which, by the way, I still have wine that I purchased for that in my apartment.
Just bring it to Luminary.
Yeah, done. And so it obviously didn't happen. And on March 20th, my thesis was due. So I remember turning it in, and I took a selfie of myself with my computer, because that's what you could do back then. Like, there was no one to speak to. And like 20 minutes later, a friend of mine texted me and was like, the same friend who's like my kindergarten best friend, that's why I call her my muse. And she's like, hey, Nancy, have you considered like utilizing your tailors to help frontline providers? I know there's a real lack of PPE.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think this is what entrepreneurs have, is like, we're doers. We hear something and we immediately think, how can I make that happen?
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my now chief sewing officer and master tailor, who has helped you numerous times. And she is fabulous, but we had a conversation. She has 20 years background in the industry. She's had her own tailor shops. She's had her own brand. And I said to her, have you thought about making PPE for frontline providers and essential workers? And at that point, it was just like, for people. And she's like, oh my gosh, I was just thinking the same thing. So we had met through the Fair Trade Coalition, the New York City Fair Trade Coalition, and had recruited there. Then I went to my Luminary members, who none of them were sewers, but what we could do is they were all looking at ways to help. So we used a GoFundMe to get donations and drivers and donors and get materials out to the sewers in order to make masks. So it was a unique proposition in the fact that we were able to get materials to the people who wanted to sew with money from people who didn't know how to.
Right. And how many did you end up doing, or what's the total?
So the last count was around 37,275, but we sent out enough materials for 43,000 and told people, once we got our commitment was 35,000, we're like, please feel free to like donate them on your own, do what you need to do with them, or let us know who you've donated them to. So a few have told us, but I'm sure all of those have gone out.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, you think about the year that we've all had, but in particular, so you're still doing your day job, right? You're about to launch a company that we at Luminary were so excited about, and then, world changes. You have to put on hold what we think is for a few months, a launch. In the midst of that, you're sort of you're not pivoting, because pivoting means you're changing directions. You never change directions. You adapted. You said, okay, here's a need. We're going to do this. Started to do the face mask initiative. And then you're now launched.
Mm-hmm.
And how's it going?
It's going really great. So I love that you say adapting. It's something I've adopted for myself. And I think I've actually done a couple workshops at Luminary, and the first workshop was called "From Shoe Designer to PPE Provider in 30 Days: Toolkit to Activate Quickly." I remember the name of it so clearly, which another Luminary member helped me come up with, to be honest. And I remember thinking the key to success is those digestible pieces.
Mm-hmm.
I think so many people I talk to and having the Luminary community, there's so many networks where they talk about being a solopreneur being very hard. And I'm like, being anyone's hard, being a co-founder. Like, I have friends who are co-founders and talk about like going to see a therapist with their co-founder, because that's as close to a marriage counseling as you can get. And I think for me, having the Luminary community and all these other women who are in the same position or have been in the same position, I will say, like, my financial advisor is a Luminary member, my event planner is a Luminary member, like all of the people I go to for advice are definitely Luminary members. And but it's funny because a lot of our customers are too, because they're all like corporate women and women identified, and also women allies and males, which we always talk about. But it's been incredibly fulfilling. But the way I look at it is this: I spend a lot of my time looking at the details, like those digestible pieces, everything from like a Trello board of all the things I want, and then my daily tasks, to like having a QuickBooks and taking a daily look and being like, okay, what happened today? How can I switch this out? Am I getting all the data I need? And all these like little things that kind of, there's an accomplishment in those small actions. But then you have to take that time to pull back when you're getting really stressed out and see what you've grown, because it feels so much when you're in the daily that your level's going down. But if you take it back and look at the big picture, you can always see an upward rise. I really, truly believe that. And I say that to all my friends. And when people say they're having a hard time, I'm like, okay, let's look at it like not even yesterday or last week. Let's look at it from a year ago to now, and where you were then and where you are now, and what are the positives, what are the negatives. And if you feel there are things that can change, it's everything from like journaling and capturing where you are to all of those, meditation.
Are you feeling good about 2021? Like, again, it's really hard as we sit here and think about like a little less, more than a year ago, we were all, 2020, and then the world changed.
Hindsight's 2020.
How are you feeling about this year?
I'm very eager and anxious, which come from the same place in the way you react in your body. And but I'm going to start fundraising in February, and I know you're a self-funded business, and I know I can't be that right now as much as I do. So I've been doing a lot of work in terms of like building out my financial model, making sure I have a pitch ready, understanding the numbers behind it. And so I think there's huge opportunities, and looking. So I kind of took each piece, because obviously data is queen. Let's just say that now. Data is queen. And so I'm looking at, okay, how much is each person paying? How much is it to travel there? How much is those little pieces, and understanding how we can scale and build. And it's anything from like just in your personal life to something that I'm doing now. So I'm very excited. And I think the biggest thing I'm excited about are those reinvention pieces. So you did the Emily in Paris
jacket.
We had another client who took a Burberry coat, and we're going to be sharing this on our Instagram at @alternew_official shortly. And she took a Burberry coat. We turned it inside out, so now the lining's showing, and it was a trench. We turned it into a motorcycle jacket. It is basically the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it wasn't like an inexpensive thing. It was an experience that is like a piece of art she gets to wear every day. And so that's kind of what we've been doing. But we want it's a 1% experience for the 99%.
Yeah, and I think we are as a consumptive society, right? It's about fast fashion, everything, right? So going back and looking through your closet. I often, every time now I go to my mom's house, I'm like, what do you got in here, right? Because so many things can be adapted, right? And so that's what I've been doing. I've been looking at older pieces that I've had or stuff that's been sitting in there that I don't want to get rid of. And I'm like, what can I do with this? And so this whole, I don't want to call it a sustainability movement, because as you mentioned around people, planet, profits, like this has to be the way forward. I mean, that's when you see companies like Poshmark going through an IPO, and it's a record-breaking number, right? And their valuation, skyrocketed. And if you think about a company like that, versus an eBay or an Etsy, it's very different model. It's all about this reselling. And then if you get it, you don't like it, you resell to someone else. That's sustainability at its core, in a sense.
And I think people forget that alterations are a sustainable solution. Yeah. I think that's the biggest issue, is people kind of become lazy. And we did a huge poll and seeing like what people did with their alterations, and 76% of the 150 people we polled, 76% said they had something in their closet for at least 6 months before they had it altered. And 6 months and more. Yeah. Like for me, it was
now that I have Alternu, not anymore. As soon as I get something, I'm like, or I find it in my closet, I'm like, put it in the bag. You've got to get it to and what's nice for those of you that are in the New York area, you can actually do that at Luminary. We do the alterations in the beauty bar. And so, no one has to come to your house. If you're not comfortable, they can come here. It's very spacious. But how do you scale this, Nancy?
There's actually a few different ways. And I think the first phase is just getting alterations done, teaching people that they can do alterations, and it can be accessible, and they can do it in their home, and they can extend the life of their clothing. Just if you think about it, 86% of unwanted clothing ends up in landfills. So that if you donate a bunch of clothes and you're all proud of yourself, there's only 14% of those bags that actually end up on someone else's back, or actually end up in a place where it's not in a landfill. So if you can start extending the life, you can actually reduce your carbon footprint. Not only that, but there's a fun story to be told if you take an old shirt and redo the buttons or add a ruffle. And so in terms of scaling, like that's our phase one. And that would be visibility. Our phase two.
And a change in behavior, right? Of the change in mindset of the consumer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then our phase two is, once that's done, is education and curriculum. Being able to not only teach people to do it themselves if they want to. I am not that person. I want someone to come to me. I was literally a designer for a bit and learned how to sew, and I'm like, oh, this is awful. I don't like it. So I want someone to come to my house and do it. And then having that opportunity to be the maker of your own wardrobe. So in terms of building that best brand by doing those things and creating a brand around it. And then like our final phase is, my North Star is really creating standards and benchmarks to alterations and repairs. So that means when you go to alteration specialists, when you go to the dry cleaner, they're two completely different prices, and you have no idea why you're paying it. I can tell you from research, we know people who have worked at alteration specialists, we know the dry cleaners. The work they're doing is not necessarily better or worse. It's just what they've decided they can charge you for it. So if we can create those standards and benchmarks, we can start being like a Michelin star, like a way to rate the way that you're going, and have comfort and loyalty the people who are doing your alterations.
But the other thing you mentioned earlier was this idea of democratization, right? And we use that word at Luminary, to this democratization of access, right? So you don't have to be at this level in your career or make this much amount of money in order to be able to afford access. You're doing the same in the alterations industry, right? It really.
Yeah. And in fact, people are like, well, celebrities get things altered all the time. That's why everything fits them so well. And then you go to the store and you assume that what you buy off the rack is going to fit you in the way it fits a celebrity. And the thing is, people are like, well, that's so costly. I'm like, is it, or is it just a lack of access? And I totally agree with you. By democratizing it, you kind of create an opportunity for everyone to have that experience.
Now, you are a member and ambassador of our organization, Luminary, and we've had since, I think, November, October, I don't know, 8 or 9, maybe more of our ambassadors on Goaldigger, and it's really important for us to share all voices. That's part of that democratization of access. Community, when you think about community, because your founder community is important, your designer community is important, your friends, your sewers. What does community mean to you as a person, not necessarily to your business, but to you?
Sure. So I always say like my 2C's, community and compassion. I think we all talk about having to be compassionate towards ourselves. And I would include that to mean compassionate, not only to yourselves, but to others who are trying to be compassionate to themselves as well. And I think for me, that community has created an opportunity for me to like get what I need when I need it. And I know that sounds so like specific, but it really is true. Like I always say, like I have friends who I can go to when I just like want to watch the dumbest movie or like make fun of like celebrity, like terrible outfits. And then other friends who I go to when I'm like, I need someone to hold me accountable and make sure I build this financial plan tomorrow. Like who wants to do that? And I think that's why having a robust and like multifaceted community is important. And what I love that you've done is created these fellowships so that within the Luminary community, there's all these different facets and all these, like our one common ground is we all have businesses, right? And we're all kind of individuals out there, whether we're co-founders or founders, but we're all over the country. We all come from different backgrounds. And I think there's something to be said for like reaching out to those people that may not be your same background. I don't even say that race, religion, otherwise. I just mean like different background. Like I grew up in a different place. I have a different skill set. I have a different demographic of customer, and learning from them and also showing them what you know. And it's silly things like being able to say, hey, do you use Trello? And they're like, what's Trello? And I'm like, well, let me tell you about my like small digestible piece.
Or in your day job, hey, have you asked for a raise during the pandemic? Yeah. Or flexibility, or you have a side hustle and do you need to get permission from your boss? Like all of those things, I think the more we can bring to the table and be transparent, the better. For all of us, including men, right? Not just women, you know this, I talk about this a lot, but bringing all of these issues, and not be afraid to ask for help, but also give help. And you do that so masterfully.
Oh, thank you so much. I believe in people. I believe in, like, I don't have friends I don't believe in. And because I truly think that if you want to do something and you think you can do it, then I think you can do it too.
Yeah. So for the budding shoe designers out there, or fashion designers, for those that are creating their own labels, how do you tell them to not give up?
I think actually what I've done in terms of that community, I've asked them why they want to do it. Because if the goal is just to like create a name for yourself and like be famous, like I'm like, you're not going to be fulfilled. Right. So in my workshop, I talk about like the 5 pillars of activating quickly. And the first pillar is mission. Like if you don't have a mission in your business, you're not going to succeed, because that's how you learn to adapt, is by having that mission. And so I think for me, telling those people, know what you want to do 20 years from now. And if that means, like you've said it perfectly before, you've always said, like, if that means you want to like know you can sell the company in 5 years, that's fine. Like there's no problem with that. But then you can kind of figure out what to do now and work backwards from there.
Yeah.
And for me, what I want to do with Ultranew, and the reason why I've like switched gears, is because I want to make an impact. I want to change consumer behavior and find access and alterations, because it was a problem I had. I literally got rid of a bag of clothes I had for 3 years in the back of my closet that all needed alterations, some of which were new. I have no idea what happened to those. And I was like, sometimes I think about those and I'm like, man, I wish I had those. And I wish Isabel were here, or one of our other tailors, and we have so many great tailors who have done so many cool things. So it's a way just to tell people, think ahead before you dive into the details.
So last question, and you talked a little bit or alluded to it earlier around your routine, right? The Trello board. How, there are so many people that aren't able to have a side hustle or are entrepreneur or have a full-time job. How are you, and I hate the word balance, it does not exist. But how are you managing all of this in your personal life?
I got this new app called Dailyo. So I've always been like the 5-minute journaler, the bullet journaler, and it's basically just asking you 3 questions like, how are you feeling today? What are you grateful for, and what would make today successful? They've turned it into an app, so every day you can put like how you're feeling, and so you can see like how the ups and downs go. And I only say that because of this. Like, I've been able to analyze why I feel down some days and why I feel up others. And the thing I've analyzed is that my friends are my vitamin D. Like, they're what I need. There are certain days I am home all day, just like, doing CADs all day for shoes. And then at night, I'm like, looking at my QuickBooks and making sure the invoices are paid. And I'm like, today was a terrible day. And I realize it's because I had no connection to anyone that day. And then there's another day, like actually yesterday, I spent the morning with a friend of mine who has a sustainable circular packaging company called the Loop Line, and then came home, did a bunch of work, got stuff done. And then I spent the evening with another dear friend of mine who has a company called Winky Lux. And it's also the reason why I'm called Party Captain Nancy. Again, story for another day, but like I have to talk about everyone. I wish I could if you're listening to this and I haven't talked about you, I meant to. I'm just and so I think it is that community, and is lifting others up is the most uplifting thing you can do for yourself.
There is as we're sort of coming to a close, as you talked about earlier, a huge, Maryland is where I went to my undergrad. I'm a massive Maryland fan. And I'm also a massive, in general, college football, college basketball, diehard. Doesn't matter who's on, I'm watching. And the coach of Alabama, Nick Saban, who, if you like him or you don't like him, he is an amazing coach. I think he's an amazing leader. But one of the things that he says, and it touches what you said, is when you go to bed at night and you're praying, don't ask to be blessed. Ask to be a blessing to others. And when I heard him say that, he was saying it in like some keynote speech. It really struck me, because so many people of who I surround myself with, even if they don't know that, that's what they're doing, right? And I strive to do that. And I learned that from my mom every day, right? So I love that you said that. And certainly you are, Nancy. Like, since the day you walked in our physical doors to every single virtual event, even if it's for 5 minutes that you pop on, you're an inspiration, you're a motivator. You bring light into every situation. So, and I want to thank you for being a part of us, for being a part of the community, for being a part of this world. You're doing things to change the world.
Well, that is very nice. Thank you very much.
And so if you don't know Nancy, you should. I'm going to throw up her handle in here, alternew_official. That is the Alternew website. As she mentioned earlier, you can also find her personally at Party Captain Nancy. And but as a user and a customer of Alternew, I can tell you not only sustainability but convenience, quality, everything. I'm now going to be a lifelong user. And Nancy knows that, because I'm constantly reaching out and saying, how can we change this? And what do we do here?
Well, I will say, actually, that's the one advice I will give is when you're with your friends and giving constructive criticism and giving feedback, just don't forget, we've created a lot of stigma around failure. And a lot of people say, like, failure leads to success. And I would actually even go beyond that and say failure is success. And I remember you actually sent some feedback when we did our first appointment with you. And I like immediately called my friend. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Kate's like, I gotta, and she's like, Nancy, that is great insight. You should be so happy she gave you. And of course she has her own company. And And in fact, we took that insight, we changed it, and it's helped the whole company. And so just don't forget, when people give you feedback, you need to make sure you reframe it and don't let it get you down. I think all entrepreneurship is a practice and perseverance. And there's a quote that I love to say, which is, the mighty oak is just an acorn that stood its ground. So
that is a great ending, especially for us goal diggers, right? So, Nancy, thank you so much. I'm excited to see where Alter goes and how we can support it, and certainly get more customers on that platform and do better for the world, right? So thank you for joining today. We will have Goaldigger again next week at 9:30 Eastern. We had to do a little switch this morning. I was on Cheddar, so I had to prioritize. Not that Nancy.
That was amazing.
Yes, about how do we support women-owned businesses during this time, as well as women in the workforce. And so, if selfish plug, if you're on Cheddar or you're on Facebook, search the segment. Ali Goldstein, who is the CEO of L'Oreal USA, was on before me talking about the same. And I think back-to-back segments were great. But so next week, same time, 9:30, same channel. And if you haven't seen this, you can download it later. We're on YouTube on our Luminary channel. And for Luminary members, you're certainly on our Facebook. Nancy, thank you again. Have a great weekend, everyone. Be safe, be healthy, wear a mask, and we'll see you all really soon.
And if you don't have one, let me know. I'll send you one.
Exactly. Just go to Alter_new_official, and we are good to go. Thanks, Nancy. Have a great weekend.